Hello, this is Chek and welcome to my video blog. Today I thought I'd share some important concerns that are not common knowledge amongst people that use weightlifting as part of their general health or performance conditioning programs. And there are some legitimate concerns about wrist straps that usually are known by therapists that rehabilitate weightlifting injuries, but not commonly known by people unless they've had one of these injuries and had to see a therapist. So there's a few things I'm going to point out, and I'm going to help you understand a little bit how the body works when lifting weights, particularly when lifting weights with your hands. And then I will make it clear to the best of my ability where the dangers of wrist straps are, and I'll finish with some suggestions for intelligent use of wrist straps. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something that's very, very important but rarely ever thought of because people don't have much time studying comprehensive functional anatomy and or working with athletic injuries, so they usually don't have a reason to study this. First and foremost, it's important to remember or realize that your grip is a regulator of stabilizer and muscle recruitment. So what I mean by that is if you are going to pick up a bar with a lot of weight on it, if that bar has this much weight, and my brain looks at that and says that's about 135 pounds, there's a perceived level of exertion that's going to have to take place. And in order for me to lift that weight, I have to have a grip strong enough to allow the weight to lift without it falling out of my hand. The harder you have to squeeze to lift a weight, the more neurological excitation there is in the system, which causes something called neurological overflow. So let me explain that a little bit to you, and I'll even give you a little demonstration of how it works. So first of all, here's the arm complex. The arm complex, when you're lifting weights, is primarily innervated by C4 for scapular elevation, C5, all these nerves come out of the neck in the region called the brachial, which means arm plexus. A bunch of nerves feeding the arm, brachial plexus. So C4 elevates the shoulder, C5 primarily abducts the arm, 6 bends the elbow and extends the wrist, 7 extends the elbow and flexes the wrist. C8 you can remember because it activates your finger flexors. If you put them together like that, you can see the number 8, and T1 opens and closes the fingers like that. So what you see is that the nerves that run the arm and hands all run together in a plexus, but as I'm sure most of you are aware, if I go to grab an object and lift it, such as doing a bent over row or a biceps curl or any kind of lift, it's not just my arm that has to stabilize my load. The arm and shoulder complex integrates with the rest of the body, and the weight must be stabilized all the way down to your feet, or you run the risk of a joint, muscle, ligament, or tendon injury somewhere in the kinetic chain. Now each of these little segments of the spinal cord, like I said, C4 is primarily responsible for scapular elevation, C5 for abduction, C6 for flexion, etc. Each of these nerves that comes out of the spinal cord represents an expression of what you could think of as a little miniature brain or miniature computer, and it has a given amount of energy that it can exert. When there is a need for more muscle recruitment due to the demand of the activity, then there is what's called neurological overflow. So you can certainly tighten your biceps without too much use of the rest of your body. Therefore, there's not much need for overflow. But if you try to lift a heavy weight, the grip is going to upregulate to match the demand forced into the situation by the weight, and the brain then says, well, that weight, it must be very heavy, it takes that much grip strength. So you get an overflow, a cascade of neurological excitation running down and up the spinal cord to excite the muscles that must work in harmony to stabilize the load in that particular movement pattern. Now, a very simple way to demonstrate neurological overflow to yourself is start by relaxing your body, make a fist, and see how much effort you can put into it before other muscles start to jump in. Okay, so I'm only primarily using C7, C8, C7, C8, T1, But as I squeeze, you see that's jumping up the chain, and then it goes up further. Now, imagine what it would be like if you were doing a maximum deadlift, how much grip strength that would require. So now if you want to experience neurological overflow to its potential, all you've got to do is take one of your fists and slowly start squeezing it, and progressively squeeze harder and harder till you're squeezing as hard as you possibly can, and you can see that it's starting to cause tension all the way down to my toes. That's because the nervous system says, well, if he's going to move something that requires that much force, it's going to require every muscle to be activated all the way down to the toes to the degree that the brain perceives as necessary to handle the load. That's very, very important to understand, because when you put a wrist strap on, you can significantly reduce the amount of grip, which is why most people wear them, especially males who are absolutely hell-bent on lifting weights too big for themselves as a means of expressing the little hormone called testosterone and making themselves feel manly, but it can come at a very big expense. So when I put a wrist strap on a bar, for example, I pull that strap around the bar, give it a wrap, and then I grab onto it. Now that allows me to lift a load with a minor amount of grip force. All I've got to do is just keep the strap from unwinding, and now it's literally hanging from my arm-shoulder complex. So think of all the times you've seen people doing things with wrist straps like bent over rows, and they're bouncing the weight off the bottom. Or they're doing chin-ups and they get to the bottom and they bounce off the bottom. When you're doing a chin-up without a wrist strap, for example, or lifting a weight, no matter where I'm at, I still have to hold myself up. I cannot completely relax the shoulder or even relax it to a great degree. I have to keep some tone in the system because my grip muscles run all the way up. The whole brachial plexus is involved. So when you wear a wrist strap, you can let the muscles completely relax or significantly relax to the point that they don't have enough tone in them to stabilize the load, which leads to pulling on joints, pulling on ligaments, which causes instability. So for example, you can stretch the ligaments of the shoulder and the joint capsule out, and you can stretch the ligaments of the wrist out, and remember, the grip's regulating recruitment all the way down to your toes. So you might be doing an exercise like a deadlift where you're not really doing pulling with the arms per se, but you're using the wrist straps to allow you to lift a weight that you actually couldn't lift without them because your grip is the limiting factor. So when you use wrist straps, you can often divert the energy that was used by the grip into the extensors, which allows you to lift a bigger weight than you can actually lift in your natural form, which simply means that you're able to cheat the system to lift a weight with less stabilizer recruitment than would be natural to lift the weight, which leads to overloading key areas of the structure depending on your lifting mechanics, prior injuries, and other complicating factors such as inflammation in your organs, as I show in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. So we need to be concerned here that, one, we don't want to forget that the grip regulates the stabilizer system whenever you're lifting something with your hands. Two, neurological overflow is a natural function of the body, and it can be disrupted wearing a wrist strap because the perceived level of exertion and the actual exertion don't match each other. So the perceived level of exertion must be higher. You wouldn't be wearing a wrist strap, but when your grip does not turn on to match the perceived level of exertion and you still lift the weight anyhow, you set yourself up for loading the kinetic chain without adequate tone in the stabilizer system, which commonly leads to damage in shoulder joints, elbow joints, wrist joints, and commonly in the low back. Now, some tips for you. These are simple tips, but they're pretty important. Paul Chek's weightlifting tip number 1. If you can't lift it, don't lift it. More people get hurt trying to lift weights they can't lift than anything you could imagine in a gym, mostly males who are, acting out hormonal stupidity, not intelligent weightlifting. And those males can be at any age. The other thing is, when you watch people that are lifting that way, and oftentimes they're training together using spotters, half the time I can't tell whether they're lifting weights or having seizures over there. So remember this Chekism. When you're watching someone lift a weight or even looking at yourself in the mirror, if it looks ugly, it is. Someone who knows how to lift weights properly looks graceful even under high load. There's a natural synergy, a natural form, a flow, like an animal moving in the wild. You shouldn't see all this herking and jerking and funky stuff. That's what causes injuries. Okay? So next, ideal use. Many people are not aware that wrist straps should not be down on the wrist itself. If you wear your wrist straps so they pass the radius and the ulna, they will go down and put traction on the carpal bones, which are very small, have cartilaginous surfaces that can easily be injured, and I've seen it happen more times than I can count, and the ligaments are pretty small and can be stretched. I've seen many athletes stretch these ligaments out, develop wrist instabilities, which causes clicking, popping, and locking of the wrist, and can be very, very painful because those ligaments get loose and the bones cannot be held in the proper position, so they lose their natural synergy in functional movements. I've seen many shoulders become unstable, and you can easily give yourself a multi-directional instability doing things like chin-ups and deadlifts with the wrist straps, because it pulls down on the shoulder so hard it destabilizes the ligaments all the way around the joint, leading to a very problematic shoulder. Yet here you have someone with big muscles and the symptoms of a very deficient stabilizer system, which, by the way, is one of the main problems with any kind of machine training whatsoever. Machine training allows you to lift weights that you probably could never lift because your stabilizers wouldn't be strong enough to do it. So you make your prime movers strong and your stabilizers weak. That's like putting 500 horsepower in a Volkswagen and not doing anything to improve the suspension or the brakes. That thing will go like hell in a straight line, but God bless you if you try to stop it or turn it. It's the same with lifting weights. You have to control the weight. Weights don't naturally go in straight lines. They go in curvilinear lines. Therefore, there's always a control factor when lifting a free weight or doing functional lifting. So make sure that when you put your wrist straps on, if you're going to use them, and you put them above the radius and the ulna and pull them tight enough that they help squeeze those bones together and stabilize the wrist, not traumatize it, then the small carpal bones and ligaments are effectively protected. Next, if you're lifting with wrist straps to aid your performance or extend a set, remember you must always control the load. You should not be snapping and jerking and cheating to try to get more lifting with ugly technique and lifting weights that you shouldn't lift. My strongest advice is don't use a wrist strap to lift a load that you cannot lift without it. You're very likely to cause progressive injury leading to some kind of a significant injury. And again, I've seen it happen many, many times. Okay? Next, wrist straps are often used by people doing Olympic lifts. Highly don't recommend that. Too much speed. If you have a wrist strap on when you're doing Olympic lifting like cleans and jerks, you can't easily let the weight go to hit the floor when you're using bumper plates. It can put a lot of traction on the arm, so people try to catch the load, and with those wrist straps on, it puts tremendous traction on the joint, and it traumatizes the ligaments and irritates the joints and leads to all sorts of chronic niggling problems. So if you're going to use wrist straps, it's best done under the guidance of a skilled coach with knowledge of functional anatomy, physiology, weightlifting technique, and biomechanics, so that the wrist straps can be used intelligently. The other thing is they're best not used when you're tired. So therefore, if you're going to use them, I would recommend using them in the beginning of the workout, not at the end of the workout, because at the end of the workout, as your muscles get tired and your stabilizers get tired, you need maximum grip recruitment to regulate the stabilizer system. And if you stick to the rule, if I can't lift it, don't lift it, you'll be okay. you can get stronger, and there's a time for supramaximal lifting, but usually under the guidance of a skilled coach, or you just get injured and you end up losing your training base, gaining weight, feeling like crap, looking shitty, taking pills, being depressed, and resorting to all sorts of other extremes that are unnecessary. So that's my little tips for you on the importance of understanding how to use wrist straps, how the system works, why you should be careful, and how to use them intelligently. Remember, if you can't lift it, don't lift it. If it looks ugly, it is. And if you want to learn lots more, look at my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. There's an entire exercise library in there. And my video series, Strong and Stable, teaches you all sorts of ways to mix different weightlifting technologies, such as machines with Swiss balls, with cables, and a variety of modalities to give you a lot more variety in how you can integrate stabilizer conditioning with prime mover conditioning. Hope you enjoyed my blog today. I'll be back with more as soon as I can. Take care. I'm Chek.